Starting devices. There we are. It is rolling. Okay, so let's get started. I'd like to welcome Professor Joseph Hill from UNC Greensboro, and Sarah Wheeler, and Mary Beth Brown. Okay, let's go. It's yours, guys.
Okay, hey guys, I'm Dr. Joseph Hill. Thank you all for having us here. I work in the department at UNCG of Specialized Education, and we work on people who have special needs for teachers, things like that. We have a specialized curriculum. And then I also work in the department of people who are working on a degree in professions in deafness, which we call PID, that's the acronym. So we're working on training interpreters, training deaf educators, training deaf advocates for people who are deaf and hard of hearing. So if you have a client who's having trouble with, say, like a law situation or something, you can have an advocate or a social worker. My background, I have my PhD and master's from Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. And that is the only university for deaf and hard of hearing people in the world. And I studied linguistics there. And I worked on social linguistics, and I studied attitudes in deafness in America. And I also studied Black ASL and how the community, African American community, signs differently than the larger white community, and just studying the differences with the localized regional signs of Latin and white.
Awesome. Hey, I'm Sarah Wheeler. I was born in Long Island, New York. I have two deaf parents, and they were both, they went to the school for the deaf. My mom was leading streams. And then we moved, when I was 3, to California, and I grew up in California, and I have a brother, and all this good stuff. Like, I joined the military, and for 6 years I was in the military. And kind of, it was like a total separation from my family. There was no, are you guys familiar with what a video phone is? Have you guys Skyped? Like web chats and stuff like that? It's kind of like that. So a video phone is used for the deaf community, and you basically set it up. You can talk from a deaf person to another deaf person, or an ASL user to another ASL user. But we didn't have those at the time. So we didn't even really have text at the time. I feel like I'm old, but I'm not that old. Back in my day. So it was really hard for a while. I was really separated from the deaf community. Well, it turns out I was in the Air Force, and I was put into an office where I was working with another deaf person. Her name was Billy, and she was, it was awesome. So me and her would go out, we'd have lunch together, we really connected. And since I grew up with deaf parents, really deaf culture is part of who I am. It's really ingrained in who I am. So I got out of the military. I met somebody. I moved to North Carolina. I met somebody who was deaf, Kevin Earp, and he started coming over. I was teaching my friends sign, and started just getting back into the community, and was like, "This is where I need to be." And by that time, there was more texting available, more video phones available, and I was able to really develop a much stronger relationship with my parents. The power of communication is really important. And so for me, being here, I feel really privileged and honored to be presenting to you, and also presenting with Dr. Hill, who's really astoundingly involved in all of this linguistics. And he's one of actually the groundbreakers in the field, talking about a lot of really important themes that are going on right now as far as language goes, particularly American Sign Language. So I'm just glad to be here. Thank you.
Great. So some of the things we wanted to talk about today. First, we want to just kind of open up the idea, the concept of language. And we want to talk about language and language families. And then after we finish discussing that, we're going to focus more on sign languages. So then at the very end, we'll talk about ASL itself and about the linguistics of ASL and all the different linguistic parts, so we can delve into that more at the end. All right, so let's get started. So first off, any questions? Anything come to mind related to sign language? Do you think that there's just one sign language worldwide? Thoughts, comments? Yes? No? Yes? One world?
Oh, we got one.
Does every spoken language have its own sign language?
I don't know. What do you think? What do you think?
I think so. But
Correct. Any other
I was
comments?
just going to say that based on the chapter that you had sent us, American Sign Language is not a representation anyway of spoken English, or it's a completely different language. So to almost make the juxtaposition of English to American Sign Language as any other country in the world in their language to a local sign language might not be so accurate.
Great. Any other thoughts?
How does communicating with different signers work? Like different language sign works?
That's a good question. All right. So a lot of people will assume that ASL is based on British Sign Language, but it's not true. The grammar of British Sign Language and American Sign Language are totally, completely different and separate. Plus, you would think that one country has one spoken language, one sign, but that's not true. One country could have several signed languages within that country. It just depends on where the communities of signers were established and how much influence they had with each other. There's about 155 sign languages, 114 sign languages throughout the world. And I'm talking about ones that we've already found and researched. We're possibly missing others that haven't been identified yet. So we're still adding to our research base and knowledge base.
I have a question. So, you went to Italy, right?
Yes.
So,
Oh, I forgot something to mention that about myself. I did go to Italy. I went to Italy I did a Fulbright scholarship there in Italy. And I learned and studied in Italy. And I was looking at Italian Sign Language and comparing it to ASL, and it is completely different. I went in knowing ASL, and I got involved with the deaf community, and I was totally clueless. I was missing everything they said. So I had to take an Italian Sign Language class to learn exactly what they are saying, and then I could slowly pick up the language, but it took me several months before I could even have basic communication with other Italian signers. So yes, it's completely different, even the Italian Sign Language to the American Sign Language.
Is learning a new sign language similar to learning a new verbal language, or is it like does sign language have a base that you can build off of, and you use the signs differently, or is it like a language spoken?
Sign languages have some commonalities, like they use your hands and your facial expressions, and you use your body, and you use your face as your grammar, especially like at ASL, we have a lot of grammar on our face, but you also use role shifting and movement, so it all depends on how you use this space around you. Or how we use classifiers to designate who and what is where in time and space. So there are some similarities, but everything is very different. Plus, how concepts are built are different. So like example, when I was in China, I couldn't understand ASL at all, but when I was in Italy, some of the cultural things were the same. Like some of the things you could kind of gesture or understand, but in China, because the cultures were so different, I was completely lost. And it was all more of a cultural thing that the gestures didn't even match. So so if that answers your question. But basically, learning sign language, since I already signed, could potentially be faster than learning a spoken language. It just depends. I teach ASL classes, and I've seen people really struggle with it in the same way that they've struggled to learn French or Spanish speaking. So it really just depends on the language user and how fast they are at accumulating languages and acquiring foreign concepts. So now we want to show you a video. We really won't show you the whole video, but it does give an example of how different sign languages look. And there's 3 different sign languages presented. It was American Sign Language, Japanese Sign Language, and French Sign Language. different in Japanese versus American versus French. They're all saying thank you. This is a sign for sorry. Father in American, mother in American.
And also notice the similarities too. There's some similarities that you can see as well.
So you can see kind of some of the differences in the different sign languages. You can see what they were saying and how it compares to different countries. So now, just in general in the world, thinking about which country has the most, which continent has the most languages, spoken or signed.
Asia. Asia.
Right? Yep, it's Asia. And then which one would have the next most?
It's the biggest, right?
Yeah, it is the biggest, yeah. Other guesses? Okay, let me show you.
So Asia and Africa are really close.
They are.
Yes, that's right, yeah. You can see how many different languages there are worldwide. And you can see how the continent numbers break down. And so you might assume that those are all spoken languages, but really that also includes signed languages as well. Remember, there's 114 different signed languages that have been identified. Well, there's ASL in America that's pretty widely used. And it's used, and there's also a Mexican Sign Language. Mexico has their own. They have LSM. And some of that has influenced, especially in the border states, ASL. And then also Canada uses some ASL, but they have some variation of their own sign languages, but really they use ASL. Because people came down here for some education and then took it back and spread it throughout Canada. And then Quebec has their own signed language, so that's two in Canada. And then they also have...
Isn't Quebec, is it LSQ?
Yes, LSQ is in Quebec. And then they have their own native signed language as well in Canada, so that's three. So that's more than three, that's three just there in Canada. So it's not like one spoken language, one signed language. It doesn't equal out like that. There can be many different signed languages within one language.
Was there any questions about that? Did you have questions about Quebec? No?
It was about Quebec.
Is,
Oh, okay.
is it similar to the French one?
What?
The Quebec one?
Yes. It has an interesting history. With ASL in Quebec, really, they didn't have anything. There's not a lot of documentation. But back in the time, people had talked about how in the schools they had learned and they trained in American Sign Language. And then people who from America had gone to France, and the French Sign Language had come here and studied and spread their language, and then they went back. So it's just kind of how people moved in amongst the countries that the languages got shared.
And I'm just going to add, my mom's in Canada now, and she's deaf. So there's a strong deaf community, but she does like we talk sometimes. Like she's picked up a lot of the language from Canada signs. There's a lot of blending, just like any languages. Whenever you're in a place and they're using different signs or different words, and you're able to adapt. And so yeah, she'll throw in some language. I'm like, Mom, what does that mean? She has to teach me. So yeah.
Good point, Sarah. Thank you. And I'm sure you've taken a world language class, you've seen something like this before. But this is a nice diagram about how languages are separated, but kind of the roots and the history. And this is all about how communities merged and languages merged as well. But this gives you a kind of brief overview idea of family histories. And it's the same concept with signed languages, that they also have a base in different languages, and as they merge with other people, they also have family trees, same as spoken languages.
So I just wanted to point out, you notice in this diagram you've got this broken line between French and Middle English. And so this is the influence of French, of Old French, on Old English when it was becoming Middle English because of the Norman invasion and so on, right? So we mentioned this before. That's where this merging of communities happens, right? Which is kind of similar to how Dr. Hill was talking about the relationship between Quebec and then ASL and the French Sign Language and so on. So that's an interesting line, and I didn't show you that in our diagram, right? But that kind of points out that there's a lot of movement and kind of connections between languages there.
And this is a little bit small. Let me see if I can make it larger. It's still small. Anyway. Can you see down here, it says Proto-American? That's ASL. And that was established in 1817. But really, if you wonder where that's from, you have to go back to French, the French Sign Language. And then you're wondering who and how did the French Sign Language develop, and you have to go even further back than that. And we have some scholars have studied how it has gone back to like a modularized French Sign Language. Sorry. And the interpreter missed something. I'm sorry. Say it again. So there's French Sign Language, and then before that, scholars have discussed about where did French Sign Language come before, and they go all the way back to the local sign language, the monasteries and stuff with the monks who had a sign language. And they used the monk sign language influence the French, and they used that to teach the children, which then spread the language even further. And so this is kind of a breakdown of how the sign language is spread. And if you see, you have French Sign Language, and that impacts American Sign Language, as well as other communities as well. And people were curious how to teach deaf children, so they would go and study language and study how other countries and other communities were teaching deaf children, and they'd bring that home to their own home countries. This is just a better picture. And you can see different sign language groups. It's kind of a very simple progression. It's just kind of a good way to summarize the idea of how languages moved. You see how American is from the French, and how the French also influenced other languages. And then there's the French and an Old French Sign Language, and that's because people who brought things added and changed, and then everything has a roots where it goes back, and you break it down, but everything is influenced by different people and different signers and different communities. But you can see how like Cambodia, Chad, Ghana, lots of different countries have also been influenced by American Sign Language as that spread worldwide. ASL itself is American Sign Language, but when you think about other countries, who's using it and how does it happen, you can see how it spread. But why do you think other people are using ASL? Why do you think it's spreading throughout the world so much?
It's a good question.
Could you maybe say that it's similar to the reason that spoken English is becoming so globalized, just because it's becoming kind of like an Esperanto for different communities?
Yeah, similar reasons. Yeah, that people have moved and spread their language. Also, if you think about the deaf schools in America and how the language spread through the deaf schools, people have gone to take education. It's education itself that educators have gone to other countries. They want to teach deaf children. And so, or people from other countries have come to America to learn how we educate our deaf children and then taken that language and concepts back to their own home countries. And we're also curious here in America, we're curious in studying what other people are doing, so we will take our concept, go to study what another culture is doing, and then leave our language behind. A lot of missionaries have spread language throughout the world. But, you know, as they spread religion, they spread language as well, and that's one of the reasons why English and American Sign Language is becoming one of the most prominent sign languages.
For me, I don't think that, you know, obviously people communicate before that, right? So I definitely, do you think that there was a language before that? Before people went over and taught American Sign Language, or if there was, or before French Sign Language, or was there a way to communicate, do you think? Yeah?
There had to be.
Huh?
There had to be.
There has to be, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, there has to be. So before this, I mean, obviously there were signed languages before these were documented. You know, people use their bodies, or they use gestures, or if you had a community, the community itself persisted, and they have their own sign systems. You know, and things changed and grew into languages. For example, if you had to communicate with somebody, just let's pick a word, the gesture say eat, what would you do? Just any, like if you met any foreigner and you had to sign eat, what would you do?
Okay, like this. Now.
Yeah, I see that. I see eat like a spoon, I see eat. Somebody's pointing to their mouth. We sign eat in ASL. So, but everybody's kind of indicating their mouth, and they're doing a gesture, even though the gestures are different. So those are 3 examples of how you could potentially do it. And then also a debate depends on your culture as well. If you grew up in a foreign country, you might use chopsticks. If you're in an Asian country, so you might say eat like this because that's a cultural thing that they do. So it really, culture influences language as well. Now if you were going to say a sentence like, I eat hamburger, or whatever, how would you maybe gesture that to someone who didn't share your He said, that's what he said. Other concepts? Yeah, come on, let's just have some fun.
Come on, guys.
What's one way you would convey a concept to somebody? Just how would you get it across? You're in a foreign country, and you need to say that I want that hamburger.
Oh, hamburger?
Okay, yeah, hamburger.
You said that concept.
Yeah, you could. Or like, I eat pizza. How about that one?
It's hard. Yeah. I love it.
He's rolling out his pizza dough. Okay, all right.
Anyone else? I eat.
Oh, you could try to make a picture of a pizza. Okay. Why do you think pizza, like you might want to sign a triangle, or like he rolled out his dough, because you're thinking of shape. So you're used to the idea of what it looks like. So okay, here's what it looks like, here's the shape, so how would I use that to convey? Or like a hamburger, maybe using a larger hand shape so that you can convey the size and shape. So you use your hand, your hands become the food. Or like if you use a fork, you could gesture fork. And sign languages started the same way, with people trying to think, okay, what do I see around me? How do I take what I see and make it into a picture and incorporate it? With Italy, their sign language is a lot of gesture. They gesture a lot of things. But then other deaf people came up with more specialized signs. Here in America, we have some gesture, but most of it is our own signs that have been created.
And can I just, go ahead.
So what's the difference, the way you're using the words, between gesture and signs? Gesture meaning that it actually is like, looks like what it's supposed to be? Is that what that means?
Well, yeah, it's a complicated question. I can tell you the history of where things started like if you think about the linguistics of sign language, you have to think about they borrowed gestures before they became true words. So a gesture is lower than a sign itself. So it's not necessarily separate or worse, but it is lower because it doesn't have its own grammar, whereas the signed languages has become a developed language with its own grammar and its rules and structure. Nowadays, people are more comfortable using the word gesture because it's obvious that we do some gesturing, but it's different because what's important is that a signed language is talking about convention. So it's common rules that people share across a culture and across a language, whereas gesture is something anybody could kind of create and make, and there is no common rules or common basic ground for how you would gesture that concept. But the sign itself is set up and it has a common convention.
And I do want to add one more thing, though. As a person, so, you know, the concept of embodiment is a really big thing. So really embodying language concepts and conveying concepts through your body and using your body is a completely different way of expressing how you feel. And I feel sometimes when I'm using American Sign Language to convey how I feel or concepts, or it almost takes on a totally different way of seeing the world and expressing concepts than you would with any spoken language. And I'm not, obviously I only speak English, so I'm not, you know, well versed in that. But I could just speak to the two languages that I know and say that just for the spoken language, I feel like my nuances are very limited. The concepts that I want to convey are very limited. But when you're able to use your facial expressions, your whole body to convey certain aspects, that it creates a whole new context in which you're conveying concepts.
So how do you convey abstract concepts or like a new invention, like a computer or like string theory? How does that enter the language?
But really, so with technology, you know, technology started a while ago, but yeah, you see different vocabulary and you see things that seem to match computer. For example, at the time they used the word computer, it didn't show up until later. You know, words pop up as the technology pops up. The computer before, in the 90s, what do you think it looked like? What did computers originally look like before they look like our laptops now?
They're massive.
Right, yeah, they're huge, like tabletop size, room size. So this was the old sign, computer. Because it matched what it looked like. But as computers and the technology changed and the machines got smaller, now the sign has changed. And so you see this for computing or typing. You see this as a computer, but it's a C on the table. So it could be almost with the sign improve or renovate. And then you've also seen the sign computer because it goes with language and logic and things like that. Computers are very logical. So you see lots of different things. But you see things we have tablets now. The language is shortening. You have a tablet. You're scrolling. So as technology changes, the language changes. And it mostly relates to the function of the thing. And with concepts, the community creates a sign and then the use kind of determines what sticks and what doesn't.
So is it just kind of like a communal negotiation?
Well, yes. It's, you know, language itself is always changing and in flux. Any language. Some words get lost, other words are created, depending on how they're used or where they're used. So yeah, it is kind of a societal negotiation. But it's not like we have a big group meeting that we sit here and we have, okay, let's come to consensus, guys, let's pick this one. It doesn't happen like that.
In English, let's say they're spoken English, there's like the Webster Dictionary, which every year they come out with words and put them in the dictionary. But how do you actually keep track of all the signs?
That's a great question.
And especially the new ones like tablet.
That's a great question.
It is. Again, we really, like Webster Dictionary, doesn't include all the English words possible. You know, it just can't. That's impossible. You know, and we're setting up video dictionaries for people to use for ASL. But really, if I see a sign that I don't understand or something, I ask the person, I say, what do you mean? And they'll let me know what they mean. So we do have ASL dictionaries, but of course it can't include all the signs. And it also depends on where this ASL dictionary is published, depends on what signs are included. You know, because there's regional and local and community-based signs that are different all over the United States.
You just hit on this research topic, so just when people start talking about it.
So with an ASL dictionary, would the definition be other signs, or would it really be a translator with the definition being English words or words in whatever vernacular is used?
Yeah, it tends to include English text.
Okay.
And they'll have English words connected to a picture of a sign, but each sign it doesn't have just one English word. It really depends on the meaning of the sign. Sometimes there'll be multiple English definitions for the same sign. Like this sign, eye, the shaking eye. And you can say, oh, that means infection, or it might say interest, or, you know, and other people might say insurance or something. It just really depends on which community you're in. So you have to look within the context of the sentence or the utterance from the user to understand the meaning of the exact sign. Or like this one, the word for run. You can have like I am running, or like I have a run in my hose, or my nose is running. So you can take one English word, R-U-N, and there's a gazillion signs depending on the meaning of that R-U-N word.
We already spoke about how language is not universal. And there's hundreds of dialects around the world, and I'm sure many more that we don't know about. And as people are going out there and really focusing research on sign language, I think more things will start coming out. So correct me if I'm wrong, Joseph, but I think sign language was just William Stoke. It was in 1963. Is that the right year?
Yeah, 63, 64. 64, I would say 64.
So it just was recognized that ASL was a language. I mean, that's recent. And so talk about people that are actually starting to notice that there's research opportunities and that there's foundation for this language. And it's not just a modality of communicating in English, but it's an actual language. And so that's something that I think will really take off, especially when we're talking about technology and everything else. In America, 500,000 to 2 million people are estimated to use American Sign Language in the United States. So it's the sixth most used language in the United States. Interestingly enough, North Carolina just passed it as a foreign language, let's say about 6 years ago. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, I mean, when we talk about all these people using American Sign Language, but the fact of the matter is it's not taught in schools as a foreign language, slowly going out there, but people are still using it. That doesn't change the fact that people are still using sign languages around the world. It's just a matter of getting recognized in academia and actually being more widespread. Texas is one of the 40 states that consider ASL foreign language. There's a lot more now, so that's something. ASL has its own grammar and syntax. I know a lot of people do think it's gestures, which is the reason why Dr. Hill did point out that early linguists didn't want to just say it was gestural. There is definitely a syntax, there's definitely a grammatical structure. But now I think linguists are recognizing the fact that there are going to be gestures involved just because it's a physical, it's a language that uses your body. So there are going to be that involved in the language. It's just part of it, and that's okay. It doesn't match maybe a spoken language form or structure, but it still is just as valid. And then Martha's Vineyard. So we can talk a little. Has anyone heard about Martha's Vineyard? What do you know? Is that the next one? Go ahead. Oh. Did we take that one? Okay. All right. Does anyone know? It looked like it was touched really fast. It's the next one. Okay. All right. All right. So this next slide, who uses American Sign Language? This is the first question. Does anyone? take a wild guess on who's the main users of American Sign Language.
It's blind.
The blind? Okay. That is
Well,
true.
deaf-blind persons do use ASL,
Yeah.
and they do have deaf schools that are also combined with blind schools. So some people can use, well, some people, blind people do use ASL,
And
but
there's-
also deaf children in their home, or children of deaf parents might use ASL, or people with friends, or what about a profession? Like here we have a professional interpreter here today, or like Sarah's also a practicing sign language interpreter. So there's a lot of people who use sign language. But really the concept of ASL itself is for the deaf community. But it comes up frequently within the conversation of ASL linguistics as who owns ASL? To whom does it belong?
Right. And yes.
For deaf, blind ASL users, they can't communicate obviously like with other deaf, blind ASL users, can they? Or how does that
Oh
work?
yes, they totally
Oh
can.
yeah. Yeah.
So like this, let us show you. This is called tactile signing, where the blind person can feel what is being said. And then when I'm listening to her, we switch hands and she tells me and I can understand and feels what she's saying.
So Helen Keller was probably the most widespread because we saw the pictures of Helen Keller. She was using tactile. There's also haptics, which is a really cool thing. I'm not going to go into depth. I know we are limited in time. But you
Where
use
you can
signals on
use-
the back.
Turn your body a little bit and then
So
so
if
if
a
he's
person
explaining
is-
about how the classroom is set up, I can show Sarah on her back.
So if I'm presenting and I'm deaf-blind, I know exactly what's going on in the room. I have the room set up, and I'm able to get all that information.
And I can convey the idea of who's where. If I'm in the front row, I can indicate here, this front table, and then this girl is raising her hand. I can point so that the presenter knows to call on
And I would call on this
person.
person.
Is tactile sign language considered a language separate from American Sign Language, or just an extension?
They call it a version of ASL because it's similar to ASL. But of course you have to make accommodations because it's so much more physical and because you do have a limitation with your motion and your sign space.
And I'm just going to go on to lip reading. So, lip reading. Has anyone ever met a deaf person, a hard of hearing person, or a deaf-blind person before? Yeah? Awesome. Okay, cool. How many of you, has there been any time where you assumed, like, maybe you could just read my lips, maybe we can communicate that way? Or would that be the first, like, go-to? No? It's very hard. So there's on here it says 40 to 60% of English words sounds look alike when spoken. Most sounds are created in your throat. So even the movement of your lips are going to be the same. And so half of what is said is going to be missed.
In Lebanon, most of deaf people actually can lip read because Arabic is kind of different in that sense. And they can lip read. Like most deaf people I met can lip read
Okay.
very well.
You say because Arabic is what?
It's just different from English. Not everything is in your throat. A lot of it is in the mouth movement.
Yeah, so exactly. It depends on the spoken language. If you feel like the speech reader can match what's written, then you understand a little bit better. But a lot of people, so yeah, it depends on the language. But like we were saying with English, a lot of the sound is made in the back of the throat. And what people read and what they say don't always match. So deaf people frequently feel lost. So yeah, you're right. It really depends on the language and how it appears on the mouth.
And there's a YouTube thing, it's called bad lip reading. Have you guys seen that? There's a perfect example right there. You think they're saying one thing and you think they're saying big cat, and they're not. So yeah, that's a great example right there. And then why don't we... Oh, sorry.
So I noticed that in addition to signing, you also move your mouth. So when learning ASL or just any sign language, I guess, is it typical to also learn the mouth movements?
You mean like ASL sign language? Does it have its own mouth movements, or are you
I
talking
guess
about
more
like
so-
English on the mouth, or are you talking about?
Yeah, more so English on the mouth, or if it does have its own mouth movements.
Yes, ASL does have its own mouth movements, and when I'm signing, we kind of used to using the English together, so there's a lot of influence of the English on the mouth with sign language. So it really depends on who is using the ASL and in what setting. It also depends on where you grew up, who you learned the language from, and what community you're in. Like this sign for success, or finally, a lot of people will say pa, so frequently it is characterized with this type of mouth movement and mouth sound. Or like fine, like yes, I'm willing, or I'm driving. People will frequently use this mouth movement to indicate driving, a casual driving, no problem, it's an easy trip down the road. Or like it's a real struggle, like ooh, it's a really rough drive, you will use a different mouth shape to, or
Far.
if it's far away, you'll use the tongue. Like, nah, it's really far away, I'm driving for forever. That's So when we're talking about sign languages, people are often curious, can you write sign language? Does it have a written form? That's all. Is it possible? Thoughts? Comments?
Yes, but not widely adopted.
Yes, that's true. I'm a linguist, so how would I write sign language?
Would the written form be in the Romantic alphabet?
Possibly. Really, there's several different ways to write sign language. Some people use English and they'll use gloss words to convey what the sign means, the very basic meaning of the sign. And it just is a basic way to show grammar. But some people wanted things that were more specific to talk about the sign and really show the sign itself and what it looked like. And so people are working to develop a system for writing ASL, and this is one system that has been created. For the question of why hasn't it caught on, I think that shows you in the next slide. There's one person who really thought hard about how to write a written form of ASL. And he was thinking back to people who had already thought about writing sign systems. And so it's important to have written form of the language for research or for just to have things documented. But it's really hard to grasp all about the form and the shape and the grammar, so how would you incorporate the complexity of signs within a written form? And so that somebody could get the piece of paper and know how to then create the sign itself. Or like we were saying before with the dictionary, we see a new sign. Like, how does that new sign, what does it look like, what does it mean, and how can I recreate it? So people really want to create a written form of ASL, but it really has not taken off yet.
Yeah, I think it's because it's complex and it's definitely new. Plus, I see a lot of the argument is a lot of people are saying, well, there's already videos, there's technology, we can save all of these signed things in a video and we're fine. But just like Dr. Hill was saying, I think there's a lot of nuances in the language that can't be captured or documented or compared. And especially as a linguist or anybody else who's studying the language, the evolution of the language, it's really important to have that written form. And without that, there's a potential for it to, slowly, you don't have that documentation over time to show the language. And so it's really important. I just don't think it's gotten any teeth yet.
So I noticed that you all don't sign and speak English at the same time. Is it difficult to sign and speak?
Yeah, because it's a different language. So I'm going to drop something in ASL or in sign. So that's why today I just chose to use English.
Exactly. Some people think it's easy to do, like to keep the mouth separate from the hands. But if you know another language, for example, say Spanish, if I have a person sitting across from me and I want to speak their language, but at the same time I have another person who is deaf who is using sign English, it would be really hard to like, could you like type English and then speak Spanish? I mean, could you do that at the same time? Like your brain would just, you can't, it's a conflict because you would get messed up in the middle if you can't physically type the English and speak the Spanish at the same time. And it's very similar with trying to speak ASL and, speak English and sign ASL. So yeah, would both languages come out perfect if you did it at the same time? No, something always gets lost or dropped or compromised.
Always.
When you were in Italy, how much did the gestures in Italian sort of influence the signing,
Which signing?
the Italian sign language?
I don't have a formal count, but the first time I learned it, I thought, like with the deaf and then hearing it Italian, it seemed very similar. We would use like right and left was very gestural, like this and that way. Like if I asked where I want to go to a coffee place, I would just assume people would point. But they would say, okay, you go down here and then go right and left. And I wasn't used to all this hand slapping and back and forth, and I didn't know it took me a while to pick it up. But if I say I was hungry, they would sign like this. Or they would use a head nod, which would mean, I doubt it.
That, I would think hungry would be like this, and then you're full and you're here.
Yeah, you hit your back. Hit your back. Yeah, I'm hungry. So I don't have a specific number, but just compared with American Sign Language, the Italian Sign Language is much higher in gestures. But so does their spoken language. They tend to gesture a lot. Italian speakers have more hands.
And I just want to add, there's international sign language too. So, so it's not. I don't know if it's officially a language or it's just a language that's used to. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's accepted as a language for conferences or for international deaf people to understand each other. Is it a formal language itself? No. It's a lot of signs that have been all added together, adopted from lots of different languages with a common numbering system so that people can come together and communicate at worldwide conferences and things like that.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right.
So I want to explain more about the written signs. This, I know it's a strange example here. This is SI5. This facial expression is very important in sign language. It doesn't usually happen out here. It happens on the face as well. So your face shows meaning. So our face is like inflection in English. If your face is really monotone, same like in English, your tone would be monotone, your face would match. So this V-shaped is for the sign have to. And this is talking about who, because you would have the lips are a circle. So see here that it's a circle. It's a V shape with a who. So who's, and here's learning. This squiggly line represents the side of your face, your profile. And then here it shows motion. That you come and learn. This is the sign to learn. Look. And then it comes to your head, learn. And this is to finger spell, SI5. Another sign for write. And then the last bit is again the V shape for question mark.
Okay, so if you're not familiar, quickly I'll just go over that. Martha's Vineyard has a large deaf community and a well-developed sign language. So it was part of the writing that you saw. But it was 1 out of every 155 people were deaf. And so late 17th century, it was a very small population, deaf people, and the language really flourished. So a lot of people used Martha's Vineyard to study ASL, got a lot of information as far as dialects and language use. But as we said, many families' home signs are used to communicate. Not necessarily, not all ASL signs are related to FSL, and not necessarily all signs have been documented. So there's home signs, and definitely ways that concepts were conveyed without a formal language happening, but there's still language happening.
This is kind of Thomas Gallaudet and Leonard Clark set up one of the first schools for deaf students. Leonard Clark, he was a deaf teacher from France, and Gallaudet was a hearing man. And they met, Gallaudet met Clark, and Clark was using Old French Sign Language. And then they also used a modularized way with the Old French Sign Language to teach written French. So French Sign Language they used, and Clark used that himself, but then he noticed the children already knew another sign language. They were using home signs, they were using their own signs, and so there's this big confusion between the modulated French Sign Language and the natural sign. They used one in the classroom and one out of the classroom. So Clark decided, instead of using this modularized forced system, to drop that and to adapt using the natural sign language for teaching deaf children. And right now, we're talking about how ASL is spread. So again, it's through the Schools for the Deaf and through education. And you can see how the deaf schools were set up and then how the concepts were spread throughout the great United States all the way to California. And now remember, as language was spread and schools were established in these individual states, they would have their own local signs or their own local systems, which were then blended with ASL to form a greater ASL, American Sign Language.
And just to add to that, technology is now really revolutionizing, I think, the way that language is being transmitted. So a lot of people are going on different sites and learning different languages. So it's really spreading a lot faster than back when there was residential schools.
And that's recently we started learning and doing research in Black Sign Language and how ASL was maybe forced onto other sign systems, but Black ASL was kept separate because, of course, for a long time the schools themselves were separate. And so the Black ASL users developed their own sign language, which is very different from the white American Sign Language. And so if you put two deaf people together, they would not have understand each other. They used two very different sign languages until about 1965, when we had the merger of educations and we had to have mainstreaming. Then the same thing happened slowly within the deaf schools, where the two schools came together, and Black Sign sadly was slowly dropped as though white American Sign Language became the majority use. And here's some of my research. Again, Black Sign Language had different vocabulary, and you could, I don't know if you can see the graph. But the number of hand, like an example, so the sign for want, this is how you use it in American Sign Language. But they would drop one hand and just say want. And that's still fine, you can still do it, it means the same and there's nothing different. It's just a style. Or dear, a lot of times they'll say just one hand. Or with the sign no, some people sign it up here, no, related to the forehead, and some people just sign no down here on the chin. So it would be a difference in that way. Or related to sign space, some sign bigger versus smaller. They'll have a lot of repetition of sentences. Use of mouthing is different. Some people don't have any mouth movements at all. So it's really a whole bunch of differences depending on for this local Black Sign Language versus the larger ASL.
So that's what we were talking about before, where William Stoke, who was a hearing man, he was hired to teach English literature at Gallaudet in the 1950s and decided that he wanted to do some research on ASL. And he was the first in 1964 to pull it all together and prove that ASL was a language. It had its own syntax and structure. And so he began to study student signing. He realized that it wasn't just gestures. It was more than gestures. It was an actual language. There was concepts being conveyed. There was a system to it. It wasn't just people coming up. And so it wasn't this rudimentary thing that I think a lot of people had assumed for a very long time. And so certainly, spoken language is one way to communicate, but sign languages is a very complex, very valid way of communicating. Again, this revolutionized a lot. It really was the starting point for a lot that happened within the deaf community, a lot of opportunities.
And now, Christian.
What do members of the deaf community do when they travel internationally? How do they communicate?
Well, really just two different ways. One, gesture, just a full-on gesture. Like like you would do if you went to a foreign country. You just kind of think about what you're trying to communicate and then convey the meaning. Like, where's the bathroom? I might say, like, ooh, like, where's the bathroom? Gesture, come on, like any human would. Or, like, I'm hungry. I might indicate, like, a food, or, like, my stomach hurts, that type of thing. Like, hey, I'm looking for where I can eat, But there is the Gestuno, which we mentioned before, the International Sign Language. And some people sign it like this. This is the number 7C. So you can use that. If the other user means Gestuno. Again, you can kind of just communicate gestures. But it really just depends on who is involved.
Sad again, what's that for?
To a bathroom, excuse me. 7, WC, water closet, WC, like British water closet, WC. So this is what I love, the linguistics. This is talking about phonology. Every language has different parts, like speech sounds. For example, in English words, we use C and and T. And we have, but sometimes C can sound like K. So, but everything is focused on the ear, or like the different parts. You can analyze the parts of English. Now, ASL itself with signs, like how would you identify the phonological cords of ASL? There's 4 different parts that you can identify. Backing up a little bit, sorry. Like, individual languages have ways that they match the different forms. And you follow a very strict rule system. So you have an inventory of sounds. Like in English, you can use a BR word, like broken. Words can start with BR or BL, like blue. But in English, we never pair BN. That doesn't really make a word. And that is same is true with ASL. The ASL doesn't use all possible handshakes. We have 4 handshakes that we use. Or like, anytime we've heard of 4, but there's lots of different possible handshakes where we don't use them all. There's also movement to indicate distance, like the circle or the line. Orientation of your hand, whether your hand is facing up or down or in or out. And where this line is created, whether it's on the forehead or somewhere else on the body, it just depends. So look, like I was saying, location could be anywhere. It doesn't have to just be in the body, it could also be in the front of you, of your sign space, or up above you. Does ASL use all possible handshapes or locations? No, it has a limit that it uses just for its own. For example, here we use R. That's a sign for R, the English letter R. We cross our fingers. But in Italian, they use a different one. They use it like this. So their fingers are flipped. So I'm used to signing R like this, but they put the middle finger on top of the index finger. Because over there, in Italian, the middle finger they put the index on top of the middle, so how it's here plus. So it feels awkward to me and different, but that's how they use, and that's their language, that's their sign. So again, here are, I missed one that I didn't mention before, facial expressions. There is typically 5 sentence line structures. And then we have morphology. It's the smallest part of a language with meaning. For example, if you have the English word walk, that's one unit of meaning. And you can't divide the WA from the LK. They don't have meaning anymore. You have to have the WALK to mean the word walk. But you can add an ing for walking or an S for walks, and that the ing and the S are separate morphemes that create a new word. And the same is true with ASL. You can add parts together to make larger parts. For example, house versus houses, you add the ES, and you have 2 morphemes. And then, from example in ASL, here's a sign for teach, to teach. And it's kind of like from me, from my brain to your brain, teach. But if you're thinking about a person who is teacher, you can say teach and then add a person indicator to indicate that you're talking about the teacher and not the act of teaching. So you can add different signs to change, like law becomes lawyer. This is a person indicator to change the meaning of the word.
Yeah, that was actually my question. So what are some other examples where person indicator would be used to make a noun out of a verb? Or a noun out of another noun, lawyer, right?
Right, yeah, there's law and then there's lawyer. So that's just one of the few things that sign itself. It's like one of the rules and structures, but it is something that's always constantly changing how you communicate different ideas. For example,
What about chair? Oh, yeah.
like stand. I can say I'm standing. But if I stand for a very long time, how would I change my sign? I'd sign it like this to indicate
And just
duration.
Just look at his face too.
The face is onerous to stand there for a long time. Or if I have the sign for study, I can study for a long time, just like I can. You can show time. Oh, repetitive, studied and studied and studied. But if I maybe did a quick study right before a test, how would I show that? I can also make another change. Oh, super crammed. I crammed right before the exam.
And then you were saying a noun to a verb too?
A noun to a noun, so like law, lawyer, because the person, okay, so there's an example here of also, I'm sorry, I'm a little confusing here. Okay, a bound morpheme. So I was just curious about that. Like, would the person indicator be a bound morpheme? Could it be a free? Does it also mean person, or is it just like in English, ER,
Like a bound morpheme is really itself a form. Like the form is different. Like I can sign person, I can do that outside, and that's fine. Or I can say teacher, but the form is different because its function is functioning as the noun.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a different form. Like another example, most of the time people get very confused with that, but if you watch, it makes sense. So you can say 2 weeks, but I have to say like 3 weeks. How would I change it? I can add the thumb for the number 3, but still sign week, or I can add a number 4 weeks, and I can change the meaning of the sign just by making one addition of a finger, or I can say a few weeks, or I ran out. So it just depends on how I pair morphemes together to convey a concept.
Mm-hmm. So they're combined. They have to be combined, and that's a bound and a bound morpheme. Okay.
Right. The combination. So it's the combination with the duration, the time factor, as well as what handshakes are being used. Like I can say stand, and I can just say stand. But if I want to indicate time or duration, then in itself has become a vowel form. And it's kind of what we were talking about before too, with the changes, how it changes from a verb to a noun. Like teach, teacher. Another example is sit. You just find sit down. Or you can say chair has a double movement, which changes the meaning.
Oh.
Or another example would say window. You could say open the window or shut the window. But if you're just using the sign to mean a noun, you'd say window. So you're not talking about a function of the window, you're just talking about it as a window itself. Or would say book. I open the book to read. Or if you want to say, oh, go grab the book, you would sign it twice to indicate that you're talking about the noun book. And again, we're talking about time duration. Say for a long time, have repetition of movement. And this is inflectional morphology. And it's still a verb, but you're adding more meaning to the word itself. You're adding more meaning. Okay, watching the time, I want to make sure
We're good.
I'm sure you're curious about word ordering. English itself tends to follow, it has a very specific word order. And it tends to be subject, verb, object. And different languages themselves have different pairings of word order. So these are different ways you can change what comes first in a sentence or an utterance. This is a breakdown of ASL. In general, ASL word order can be subject, verb, object. The girl purchased a book. So very simple. Girl buys book. But if you wanted to communicate chase dog, then you would have to separate and create your topic. If I have something moving, I have to talk about my point first before the descriptor. So I analyze my I set up my topic, and then I make all the comments I have about the topic. So the first is very simple. Hold on one second. So you can set up, again, like if the cat chases the dog, you can say very simple with a very, back up and do, again, just a simple, just regular, the cat chases the dog. Again, it would look like this. Just regular sentence, like the cat chases the dog. It would just be very, calm. But if I wanted to add inflection, then I could maybe add a question mark. Is the cat chasing the dog? I could say like the cat and pause for emphasis with my eyebrows up is chasing the dog. Or here, if for example, this changes the meaning. Like if I say cat with my eyebrows up, that's not the topic. I guess I have the cat, and now the dog comes in. I can say cat and put the cat in space, and then I can say the dog is chasing the cat. So I can still set up the cat as my topic, but I can flip dog to the front of the sentence, have the dog chase the cat. What does pro mean? Pro means like pointing. It's like a pronoun. Like me, her, you, them, us, it's a pronoun. Some people compare, why are you pointing? That seems rude in some languages, but really in ASL, pointing is just a pronoun. It's just a feature of ASL. Pronominal feature. So the boy falls, the boy fell. You're talking about the boy himself. So the boy fell, and you can point to where the boy was in space. And if the boy is fine, you can say, yeah, the boy fell, and he's fine. Nothing happened. Nothing fell on him, he fell. He himself did the falling, because the pronoun is point. But if you add a head nod at the end, you could say, it changes the meaning of the sentence. You could say, like a little yes nod. Is he happy? Yeah, he's fine. If I drop the first part, but I still have a head nod at the end, I can say it's all right.
Okay, I have a question that I'll do this very quick because I want you guys to be able to ask questions. But last week we had a speaker, a Cherokee presenter, and he was talking about pronouns in Cherokee, and especially in particular about first person plural pronouns, so that you can indicate different types of we. Whereas in English, we is we. In Cherokee, and this is true in some other languages too, you've got, we meaning me and him, we, or all of us here, we, or me and, half of you, me and like people outside this classroom, none of you. All of those would be different we's. So since I was just wondering if, given the visual space that's available, is there a way also to do that, or is it just like a one pronoun?
Yes, we're like Cherokee, we have different we's. So I can say me alone, or like if I'm talking to Sarah, I can point to Sarah. But it's a point where your eyes are pointed. So that I can be talking to her, I'm pointing at her, but it's where my eyes are looking. It loses meaning if I'm looking to Sarah but pointing at her.
Okay.
So I'm pointing her means I'm talking about her. But with the we's, yeah, we can say, most of the time you say like me, which means the group. But you can shift about who, which we. Like you can say we in this classroom, or you can communicate other we's. We can say we as this bigger part, or you can say we us over here. But see my body shifts, and I'm cutting this side of the room off. But you can also say if you're talking about like including myself, I can say the two of us, we. This is me, and that is her, the two of us. Or I can say, like me as the interpreter, that indicates where my body is pointed. Or I could say the two of them. This is Sarah, and this is the interpreter, the two of them. Or we can say 3, 4, 5 people. It just depends on, like we can say the 5 of us. Or the 5 of them. Or the 5 of them. So yes, you can use your sign space to change the meanings of your pronouns.
There was a question there.
I was wondering if ASL has different registers, and if it does, what would that look like?
Oh yeah, ASL definitely has different registers. But really it just depends on where you are and who you're speaking with. So you have a very formal register for presentations, which tends to be a more clear signing style. You use bigger signs, be more careful about your articulation, that type of thing. Plus you tend to use signs that are more commonly accepted, more known. You wouldn't use like a local home sign, or a local, not home sign, but a local regional variety. You'd use more of a standard common ASL. With a more informal register, you might use a faster signer style or slower, depending on who you're speaking with. Plus your sign space tends to be lower. If I'm in a formal register, my hands are up higher because I'm talking to a larger audience. So you change your sign space depending on your register. Also interrupting, like there's more interrupting in an informal register versus a formal register. So yes, there's lots of differences.
Can you talk a little bit about the history and development of a meta language in ASL? So words like morpheme and allophone, and how those kind of words were developed as a language to talk about language in ASL?
Clarify.
So we've kind of developed in English, and most of our languages have a meta language, so the words that we use to talk about language. So how would that sort of develop in ASL? Because it's obviously a very specific purpose, and now in this room we have, I'm assuming you're both signing meta words that are our words talking about how we use other words.
Right. So the first time, one second. Sorry. Yeah. So with Stowe, back when he was first analyzing ASL, they were talking about developing, words to describe the signs themselves, and kind of, they were setting up the linguistic system, and they were trying to prove that it itself was an actual language. So then they had set up words and signs to talk about it, but then they noticed that it did follow this, ASL followed the same sign and structure that other languages did, so they stopped the things that they had created and just went back with the commonly accepted words. So they were just using the general concepts of linguistics. And so basically, the meta language was kind of already there, and they borrowed it from English but applied it to sign. Once they realized that the ASL itself does have its own structure and rules and linguistics, they could apply the same concepts from the study of English and other languages to the study of ASL, and it's the same meta language because you're still discussing how language is formed and the breakdown and stuff.
Did they invent signs for the meta language?
Oh, you mean like the signs themselves? Oh, yeah, of course, yes. So yes, like you did have to come up with a concept of phonology to match. The sign was created to match the concept. So many linguists also will write using, will write using the English words, and they'll spell the words, and sometimes you spell it, finger spell, and that becomes a sign. But then yes, once you finger spelled it and they understand the meaning, and the meaning is internalized and applied to the language, then a sign was developed to match the linguistic term, the meta term in ASL.
Is there any examples that any
like an example, this is a sign for phonology. Because it talks about the form and the function of the word itself. Some people sign phonology with a P, an English P, because it relates to sound in English. But other people who are thinking about ASL, they said that doesn't fit ASL, it has nothing to do with actual sound. So ASL is on the hand, so they developed this related to function, and you have 5 different parts to indicate parts, little parts. So we created this like phonology to indicate the ASL meaning of it.
We're going to have to wrap up. I'm sure you guys have lots of questions. This is not enough time to talk about sign languages and American Sign Language. If you do have more questions, I'm sure we could, read and so on. So you can take sign language, you can study it. I'm sure we can forward any questions that you have. We will have the lecture available. Also, lecture notes. I'm going to have all those. So. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. Is that what it is? Yeah. Oh, like this? Okay, yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Great. Yes.
And thanks to the interpreter.